I want to be upfront about something before I tell you this story, because I know how it sounds from the outside. I'm not a bitter person. I've never been the type to stew over things, or replay old memories just to feel wronged. I was raised to be practical. Practical was the word my mother used most to describe me, and I think she meant it as a compliment, though over time I started to hear something else underneath it. Practical meant I didn't need much. Practical meant I'd figure it out. Practical meant the emotional bandwidth she had left over after taking care of everything else didn't need to stretch quite as far when it came to me, because I'd be fine. And for a long time, I believed her. I grew up in Medford, Oregon, in a ranch-style house on a street where everyone kept their lawns mowed and their holiday decorations up, exactly long enough to seem festive but not tacky. My parents, my mother and my father, were good people by most measures. My father worked for the county assessor's office for 22 years. My mother ran a small alterations and tailoring business out of our garage. They went to church on Sundays. They brought casseroles to neighbors when someone had surgery. They remembered to vote. From the outside, we were an ordinary, respectable family, and I was the older daughter, who got straight A's and never caused any trouble. My sister is 4 years younger than me. Her name is Poppy, and she really does look like one. Bright, red-cheeked, the kind of girl who walks into a room and makes people feel like the sun just shifted toward her. I don't say that with jealousy. I genuinely love my sister, but I grew up watching my parents orbit her the way you can't help but orbit something warm when the rest of the room is cold. It wasn't that they disliked me. It was more like I had been quietly classified as the one who didn't require tending. I was a plant that watered itself. Poppy was the garden they were always in the middle of designing. I notice everything. I always have. I noticed when Poppy's school play got marked on the family calendar in red, and mine got a pencil mark that was later erased. I noticed when my mother spent a Saturday afternoon teaching Poppy to sew her own Halloween costume and didn't offer to teach me the same, even though the machine was right there. I noticed that my father would stop whatever he was doing to listen to Poppy's stories from school, laughing at the right moments, asking follow-up questions. But when I came home with news, with something I was proud of, he had a way of nodding while his eyes drifted back to whatever was on the TV. I noticed. I just learned not to say anything about it, because the one time I did, around age 12, my mother sat me down and explained that Poppy was more sensitive than I was. That I was strong. That being strong meant I could handle things my sister couldn't. She said it like it was a gift. I tried to receive it that way. I was 17 when I got a part-time job at a bakery on Oak Street, the one with the pale blue awning that locals called the Bluebell. I got it on my own, answered the ad on a community board, showed up in my nicest blouse, and asked the owner, a heavyset woman named Mrs. Fitch, if she'd be willing to give a teenager a shot. She said she would if I showed up on time and didn't eat the product. I never ate the product and I was never late. Not once in the 2 years I worked there. I saved every check. I kept the money in a plain white envelope inside my copy of The Grapes of Wrath, which no one in my family was ever going to pick up by accident. I didn't know exactly what I was saving for, but I knew with the clarity that comes from paying attention for a long time that I was going to need it. My graduation was in June, a Sunday afternoon. The ceremony was at the high school stadium. We wore royal blue gowns and it was unseasonably hot for Oregon, and the folding chairs left lines on the back of everyone's thighs. I'd earned the second highest GPA in my class. I was delivering a short speech as the student recognition honoree, not valedictorian, but close enough that my name was printed in the program in bold. I want to be careful here about what I expected. I didn't expect a party. I didn't expect a banner or balloons or a cake with my face on it. I knew my family well enough not to build castles out of those kinds of expectations. What I expected, what I thought was basic and reasonable and human, was for my parents to be in those folding chairs when I walked across that stage. They weren't. I found out the morning of graduation. I came downstairs at 8 in a state of quiet, focused calm, the kind you build around yourself like scaffolding when you're about to do something nerve-wracking. My mother was on the phone in the kitchen. My father was in the driveway loading the car. Loading, I realized. Not the folding lawn chairs we used for outdoor events, but the big cooler, the one we only took on road trips or to Popeye's away games. I stood in the doorway and said, "What's going on?" My mother held up one finger without looking at me, still on the phone. My father closed the trunk and came inside looking the way he did when he was hoping to get through an awkward conversation quickly. "Poppy's regional dance showcase was moved," he said. "They rescheduled it last week. It's today, up in Grants Pass. We'll be back by evening." I want you to feel the specific weight of what he just told me. My high school graduation, the ceremony at which my name was in the program in bold, was happening that afternoon, and my parents were driving 45 minutes north to watch my sister perform in a regional dance showcase they could have attended at any of its future dates, because regional showcases have more than one performance. I said, "That's today. We know the timing is tough." My mother came off the phone. She came over and put both hands on my shoulders and said, "We are so proud of you, sweetheart. You know that. We'll watch the video." She kissed my cheek. Her lip gloss was already on, which meant she had already made her decision before she came downstairs. She was just waiting for me to figure it out. I didn't cry. I was 17, and I had learned a long time ago that crying in that kitchen produced apologies. I'd have to accept without anything actually changing. And then I'd have to manage their guilt on top of my own feelings. And somehow I'd end up being the one to make everyone feel better. So I didn't cry. I made myself a piece of toast, ate it standing over the sink, went back upstairs, put on my gown, and drove myself to graduation in the car I'd saved up to buy. An 11-year-old Honda with a cracked dashboard and AC that only worked on the driver's side. My teacher, the one who had written my college recommendation letter, found me sitting alone in the staging area before the ceremony. His name was Mr. Albrecht, and he was the kind of teacher who remembered things about students that weren't on any form. He looked at me and said, "Family running late?" I said, "They couldn't make it." He didn't say anything for a second. Then he said, "Then I'll be in the 4th row center." He was. I spotted him when I walked across the stage. He was the one clapping loudly. I gave my speech. I shook the principal's hand. I collected my diploma in its cardboard sleeve and walked back to my seat and watched the rest of my classmates have their moment. I took photographs with a few friends, stood next to their families for pictures, smiled when invited and stepped back when not. I drove myself home. There was a card on the kitchen table with a $20 bill tucked inside. The card said, "We love you, we're proud of you, dinner at Riverside Grill this week, your choice." It was signed Mom and Dad. There was no mention of the graduation, no acknowledgement that they hadn't been there. It was written in a tone that assumed I'd understand, because I always did. I understood something that night, sitting alone in my room with my diploma. I understood that I had been given a role in this family, and the role was to not require things. To manage my own milestones. To celebrate quietly so no one else had to. I was 18 now, and I was done. I didn't do anything dramatic about it. I was practical, remember. I spent the next 3 months applying to every scholarship I could find. I wrote 19 separate essays. I researched financial aid requirements and FAFSA deadlines with the same energy I'd given to every assignment that had ever mattered to me, which was a lot of energy, because I was serious about things, even when other people weren't serious about me. I applied to 6 universities, all of them out of state, because I needed more than distance from a town. I needed distance from the version of myself that had learned to take up no space. I got into the nursing program at Arizona State University in Tempe. It came with a substantial need-based financial aid package, a merit scholarship I'd applied for separately, and a work-study placement at the campus health clinic. Between all of it, my first year was nearly fully funded. I found out on a Friday afternoon in March, in the Bluebell's back room during my lunch break, huddled over my phone between a rack of cooling trays and the industrial mixer. I read the email 3 times, then I pressed my back against the cool metal shelving, closed my eyes, and sat with it for exactly 2 minutes, because I had to be back on the floor at 1. There was nobody to call. My best friend was at soccer practice. My grandmother lived 2 states away and didn't always hear her phone. My parents were home. I chose not to call them. I told my parents over dinner that weekend. I laid it out the way I'd practiced. The school, the program, the scholarship, the aid package. I'd done it on my own. I'd be leaving in August. My father put down his fork and said I should have consulted them before applying anywhere out of state. My mother said she wasn't sure Arizona was the right environment for me. Did I research the cost of living? Had I really thought this through? I said yes. I said I'd been thinking it through for a long time. My mother said she just didn't want me to make a decision I'd regret. She said it with that same gentle, tilted expression she had when she was saying something that sounded like concern, but landed like doubt. I moved into my dorm the 3rd week of August. Drove down with my car loaded to the roof. My parents helped me carry 3 boxes up to the 2nd floor, stayed for 45 minutes, hugged me at the curb, and left. My mother cried a little. My father patted my shoulder. It felt like the goodbye you give someone at an airport, when you're not sure how much the trip means to them. I didn't let myself feel it until I was alone in the room that night, with the fluorescent light buzzing, and my roommate not yet arrived, and the noise of a campus I didn't know yet coming through the window. I let myself feel it for about 20 minutes. Then I got out my planner and made a list of everything I needed to do in the next 48 hours, because that was how I worked. That was always how I worked, and I wasn't going to stop now. I was 2 months into my first semester when I got a call from the financial aid office. Her name was Ms. Carver. She was calm and professional and careful with her words, the way people are when they're delivering news they know is going to upset you. She said there had been a discrepancy flagged on my financial aid file. Someone had submitted a signed statement asserting that I was still a legal dependent in my parents' household, still living at home, still being financially supported by them. This claim, if substantiated, would reclassify my aid eligibility and significantly reduce my package. She said she wanted to give me the opportunity to respond before any action was taken. I sat in the hallway outside my chemistry lab, with my back against the cinder block wall, and said, "Who submitted it?" She said she couldn't share the specifics, but she could tell me that it had arrived from someone identifying themselves as a parent or guardian. I said, "I see." I didn't say anything else for a moment. I was doing what I always did when something hit me hard, which was find the practical layer as fast as possible and stand on it before the ground could fall away. I asked Miss Carver what documentation I would need to provide to dispute it. She told me. I thanked her. I hung up. I sat there in that hallway for probably 4 minutes. Students walked past me on both sides. Someone's backpack clipped my shoulder. I thought about the $20 bill in the graduation card. I thought about my mother's face when she told me she was proud of me, and then walked out to a packed car. I thought about the version of myself, who had spent 6 years telling herself she wasn't angry, she was just practical, and I thought about the fact that my parents had taken the time, the deliberate, intentional time, to file paperwork with my university, designed to strip away the funding that was the only reason I could be there at all. That was the moment something in me stopped asking why. Some questions, once you've sat with them long enough, stop being questions. The documentation process took almost 2 months. I had to prove financial independence, gather bank records showing I had been self-supporting for over a year, provide tax filings, get a letter from Mrs. Fitch at the Bluebell confirming my employment history and the wages I'd earned. I had to get a statement from my landlord, Bag Medford, confirming I'd never been on any lease in my parents' home. I had to do all of this while carrying 16 credit hours and working 12 hours a week at the campus health clinic and trying to make friends in a city where I didn't know anyone, and where the sun was so relentless that I wore SPF 50 on top of my SPF 30, just to walk to class. I won the dispute. Ms. Carver called me on a Thursday morning to tell me my aid package was restored in full, and the original claim had been dismissed for insufficient evidence. She said it in a tone that told me she understood what had happened, even if the paperwork couldn't say so. I said thank you and got off the phone and sat in my car in the campus parking structure for a few minutes. I didn't cry. I didn't feel the surge of relief I'd expected. I felt tired. The specific tiredness that comes not from overwork, but from spending energy on something that never should have been necessary in the first place. I didn't contact my parents. I didn't call to confront them, or to tell them what I now knew, or to ask them to explain themselves. I had learned, through years of trying, that those conversations in my family followed a fixed route. I raised the concern, my mother cried, my father went cold, and somehow by the end I was apologizing for making things uncomfortable. I was done taking that road. I called my grandmother instead. She's in Bend, in a small apartment near the river. She picks up on the second ring, always, like she's been expecting it. I told her about the dispute, all of it. She listened without interrupting, which is a skill very few people have. When I finished, she said, "Well, you handled it. Not I'm sorry they did that. Not can you believe them. Just, you handled it." Which was the right thing to say, because it put the credit where it belonged. I started focusing on school the way I'd always focused on things that mattered to me, with everything I had. My study group for anatomy met 3 times a week in the library's 4th-floor room that always smelled like dry erase markers. I got close to a woman named Portia, who was from Indianapolis and had a laugh like a fire alarm and the sharpest clinical mind I'd ever encountered in a peer. I got close to a guy named Tobias, who was pre-med and from a family that was loud and chaotic and never forgot a birthday, which I found both comforting and deeply strange to be around. These people became my people in the way that only people you suffer through difficult things with can become. I finished my first year with a 3.87 GPA. I was selected for a competitive summer internship at a hospital in Phoenix. Through a first-generation college students initiative, a professor whose research focused on healthcare access in underserved communities asked if I'd be willing to contribute to a paper she was putting together on the unique barriers first-gen nursing students faced. I said yes without hesitating. My parents found out I was thriving the way these things always happen, through the mouth of someone back home who meant well and didn't know better. My mother sent me a text message one evening while I was studying for my pharmacology exam. It said, "Heard you're doing really well down there. So happy for you. Your sister just started her associate's program at the community college. We're so proud of her too." I read it twice. Then I put my phone face down on the desk and went back to my notes. There is a particular kind of message that pretends to be about you, while being entirely about someone else. I'd been receiving that kind of message my whole life. I had learned to recognize it, and I had learned that responding to it never produced the acknowledgement I actually wanted. So I didn't respond. I left it on read, which is something I rarely do, but in this case it felt more honest than the alternative. That night I thought about what I would have wanted her to say. I thought about it for longer than I'd like to admit. I wanted her to say, I know we weren't there when we should have been. I know you built this alone. I'm sorry. That's all. Just that. Not even a detailed accounting of all the ways they'd fallen short. Just a recognition that I existed, that I had worked hard, that the absence of support was real, and not something I'd invented in a particularly sensitive moment. She didn't say that. I'm not sure she's capable of it. And I spent a long time being angry about that before I realized that waiting for someone to say the thing they're not built to say is its own kind of trap. The following spring, I started writing. Not anything I intended to share. I opened a notes app on my phone during a long shift at the health clinic on a night when it was quiet and just started typing. I wrote about the graduation. I wrote about the car, loaded with the cooler. I wrote about sitting in a college hallway, learning that my parents had filed paperwork against me. I wrote about the white envelope of cash inside a book nobody read. I wrote without trying to make it neat or fair or balanced. I just wrote it the way it had actually happened, from the inside. I kept writing. Eventually it became a blog. I didn't put my full name on it. I called it what it was. The title I chose was honest and quiet and a little sad. And within 2 months people were finding it in ways I hadn't anticipated. Women. Mostly. Women who left comments that read like letters they'd never sent. This is exactly what my childhood felt like. I thought I was the only one who grew up feeling like the spare tire. How do you learn to stop apologizing for succeeding? I answered, every single one, late at night, sitting cross-legged on my dorm bed, while Portia slept 6 feet away, and the campus outside had finally gone quiet. I answered them because it helped me, and because I believed it helped them. And because if the version of me at 17, eating toast over the sink in her graduation gown, could have read something like this, I think it would have mattered. A writer who covered family estrangement for a parenting and culture website reached out and asked if I'd be willing to do an interview. I said yes. The piece ran on a Thursday morning, and by Friday it had been shared more times than anything I'd ever been part of. My aunt texted me a screenshot of my mother's Facebook comment on the article. It said, some children carry their disappointments into adulthood and call it therapy. I looked at that comment for a while. I thought about responding. I had a lot of things I could have said. Factual things, documented things, things that would have been very difficult to argue with. But I realized, sitting there with my phone in my hand, that I didn't need to. The people who mattered already knew what they needed to know, and the people who sided with a Facebook comment over a documented pattern were not people whose opinion was going to shift my sense of my own life. I archived the screenshot and went to study. I'm 25 now. I graduated last spring with my BSN and a 3.9. I have a job I earned at a hospital in Scottsdale that specializes in pediatric care, which is exactly where I wanted to be. And I knew I wanted to be there before I'd even started nursing school. I live in a 2-bedroom apartment in Tempe that I chose and signed for myself. My roommate is Portia, and she is still exactly as loud and still the most competent person I know in a clinical setting. I have a community of people here who would show up without me having to ask twice. I have my grandmother, who calls on Sundays, who always starts with tell me what's good, and I always have something to tell her. My sister and I are finding our way. It's careful and slow, but it's real. She called me last fall, out of nowhere, and said she'd been thinking a lot about how things were when we were growing up. She said she always knew I was treated differently, and she'd felt bad about it for years. Guilty in a way she hadn't had the language for until recently. I told her she didn't need to carry that. She was a child too, in that house, and whatever advantages she had weren't things she'd asked for or chosen. She didn't set the terms of how our parents loved people. She was just the one who had been placed in this light. We talked for almost 2 hours that night. It was the longest real conversation we'd had in years. My parents and I are not close. There have been gestures. A birthday card last year. A brief text exchange over the holidays. A message from my father that said we miss you without any of the things that would have made that sentence land differently. I haven't closed the door. I'm not the kind of person who closes doors as a punishment, and I'm not interested in carrying that kind of resentment through my 30s. But I'm also not going to open it further until there's something honest waiting on the other side. What I know is this. The diploma is mine. The scholarship is mine, the restored one that they tried to take. The friendships, the career. The license I'm going to hang on my wall in a frame I chose. Those are mine. And the person who built them, the girl who drove herself to graduation in a Honda, with a broken dashboard, and kept the money in an envelope inside a book, she's mine too. I used to think the hardest part of my childhood was not being seen. I've come to understand that the hardest part was learning to see myself clearly without the reflection of people who were supposed to hold that mirror first. That work doesn't end. I still catch myself making myself smaller at the wrong moments. I still have a reflex that says you're asking for too much, when I'm asking for something completely reasonable. Those things get quieter, but they don't disappear overnight. What doesn't disappear either is the version of you that survived all of it and kept going anyway. That person is in you. And she's been there the whole time, making toast over the sink, and driving to ceremonies alone, and sitting in hallways after bad news and still, always, doing the next thing. You deserve someone who shows up to the folding chairs. And if they don't, I hope you have a Mr. Albrecht in the fourth row, center, clapping loudly enough that you can hear it from the stage.